Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. On this episode of the podcast, we're talking with Pete Long, well-known cabin designer located in Gananoque, Ontario. He's most well known for designing and building the OG Insta-famous cabin called the Ravenhouse. But since then, he's continued to create new designs of some of the most beautiful cabins in the world. I'm a little bit biased as he's also the designer of Cozy Rock Cabin, but I'm certain I can find thousands of others who would probably agree with me. Today we chat about cabin designs, the build process, cost versus value, and a whole lot more. Let's do it. Pete, welcome to the podcast. It is so good to be talking with you.
It's so good to be here.
So start by telling us just a quick introduction, who you are, where you're located right now, and whatever you would consider your current job title to be.
I am in Gananoque, Ontario, which is a tiny little town halfway between Ottawa and Toronto, if you have any Canadian geography. It's on the St. Lawrence River, super wild area, wild looking area, like the landscape's really dramatic. And because it's a small town, it hasn't been overrun. So it's a great place to be. I have a couple of job titles currently, but I think mostly what I do when I'm designing and helping people figure out what they're aiming for is I've always thought of myself as a bit of a not a design doula, but a facilitator of taking people's dreams and interpreting what they're saying and translating that into what can happen in reality. More than anything else, that's what I do. I'm more interested in helping people take their ideas and make them into reality rather than me coming up with all of the ideas and trying to sell them on that. I find it much more enjoyable to let them really take an active lead and, follow their lead and point them in the right direction and help, if they, something as simple as recently we're redoing an old farmhouse that they've, come up with a bunch of floor plans for their bedroom and their master bathroom. And I just look at them and think, oh my goodness, you've got your toilet 3 inches away from your shower. That's not going to work. Little things like that, helping them understand some basic rules, but mostly letting them explore their design ideas on their own. That's what a facilitator or I don't even know what you'd call that.
Is that alluding like kind of your maybe making all these design decisions versus kind of the client? Is that kind of
I have found that most people have ideas of where they want to go. I find the hardest people to work with are ones that really have no idea, or they're just looking for, hey, you're Pete Long, can you just design me something? I'm like, well, give me some parameters. I need some guardrails. Whereas I find a lot of people come to me already they have preconceived ideas of what they want it to look like, how they want it to feel, and so we just go with those ideas right off the bat, rather than me starting from scratch. I find you guys as architects, I don't know whether that's part of your thing, but it is. I find blank page work very frustrating because I find it's a constant battle because everyone comes with preconceived notions of what they want and how they want to see things. And if I present something that is outside those boundaries, It never goes quite as smoothly as when we're just following their lead. That's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Now, your most famous design is the original Raven House, the one that like originally, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the one that introduced me to you. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of the internet and the world found you through that one. Tell us the story of that particular cabin, the idea, the design, the build.
So there's no point in time. There's no one single moment where I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Everything's been an evolution. And I would say probably I would go back to 2009, and I was building a house, a small off-grid house out in farm country. And so it was, small and high tech and beautiful design, and the landscape was gorgeous. And at the time, I was coming off working with a crew where we were doing big, you know, big 3, 4, 5,000 square foot custom places, and they were great. They're beautiful, and it was good work. But I didn't realize how not disconnected, how that wasn't really my jam. And until I got to this a small house out rural, in a rural location, and it was like, boom, this is what I want to be doing. I want to be forget the big stuff. Like, yeah, it's good work, but not for me. And I really, after that job, I really started focusing on smaller, designing and building smaller places. And I like the challenges of it. And then as time went on, and I kept pursuing more of that, I started renting a cabin of a friend of mine, and it was like, oh, this is the best. It was like, an epiphany of, 2009. I got an inkling of the direction I needed to go, and then when I got into her cabin and started spending more time there, it was, yes, this is absolutely what I want to do. And so, and things worked out.
Wait,
And
stop there.
okay.
Stop there. What was it about that cabin? Do you remember? Like, what was it when you were there that gave you that epiphany of not only is this something I want to build for myself, but also for other people?
Nothing. And I mean that in the most active verb way. There was the deep simplicity. Uh, there was no bells, no whistles. It wasn't oversized. There was no you know master bedroom that's 1,000 square feet kind of thing. It was one room, wood stove, big windows to outside, small kitchen. You open the windows and you don't hear anything except birds and wind in the trees. And it was like, yes, that's it. You just walk in and settle in and make yourself a tea or coffee, and you can feel your blood pressure dropping, and just, no drugs required. It's just so chill. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was great, until then. And so this is sort of the beginning of the big wave of cabin rentals, or cabins as a place to rent and as a getaway. That really started taking off, and she started renting her cabin, when I wasn't there, and more. And I was like, I got squeezed out. So I thought, well, okay.
Oh,
No, it was good. It was perfect. It was
yeah.
it was ideal, because if I hadn't been squeezed out, I would have stayed, kept going and using it. It would have been, mine by default. And so I started, sketching. I've got like a thick book of sketches of what ultimately became the Ravenhouse Cabin. And I mean, to be honest, I think I was still tinkering even after I had started building. I was rearranging windows and, adjusting the dimensions of things right to the last minute. But because it was purely for me and Kristen, it didn't, I don't know, I didn't have to ask a customer, what do you want to do here? What do you want to do there? How do you want this to look? It was all, whatever you want to do. it's me.
Right.
And
Right.
it like I had a sweet location, I had the time, I had the money, so everything just sort of circled into that, just lining up and letting it happen organically. And yeah, that's it. That's what came out of it.
And I love that it was originally for you, because we all know now that you went on to rent it a little
Yeah.
bit while still using it yourself. And
Yeah.
the internet really it just took it and ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about what you were seeing in the kind of, I think, newly coined cabin porn world at that time. I think that was right around, correct me if I'm wrong, when that was starting.
Yeah.
And you've been around since the beginning of that through a lot of the growth. What have you seen and observed from the beginning through where we are now?
At the beginning, when we started renting, um, it was mostly adventurous, millennials, and I say adventurous because it was completely off grid. And no running water, solar, electric, so you couldn't. You have lights and you can charge your devices, but you can't run a blender to make margaritas or anything like that. And so it was, and no running water means it's an outhouse and not a toilet. And the the folks that came initially, we just fell in love with them. And more than once over months, I said to Kristen, man, I would do this with no pay. I would do this just to let people come and enjoy the experience, because it's pretty freaking magical. Um, you know what that's like, Janice. It's indescribable. And at the beginning, it was a very different type of person that was renting. And then as time went on, and the internet kind of, put the spotlight on things, uh, we had more what I called, a little sarcastically, I called them trophy hunters. And they never worked out really well, or rarely worked out really well as as renters, because they were just, oh, look at this cabin, let's go rent it on Airbnb, it looks awesome. But they didn't, you know, educate themselves as to the whole situation. And we had folks one time that from France, and they arrived, and she texted me and she said, "Where's the shower?" I said, "There's no shower. This is like an off-grid cabin." And so as time went on, people changed. The profile of the customers changed, and kind of regretted that to a certain extent. I mean, I'm grateful for everything that has come of it, but it sort of lost that the wholesome vibe that we when we first started. And so it became important for us to really, in our, in the listing, be totally clear what you're going to get, what you're going to experience, and trying to encourage people to, open their minds to that idea that the experience can be great without bells and whistles.
And I feel like we're in another one of those growth phases where more and more people are becoming interested in cabin culture, but for a variety of reasons. What do you see from your point of view? Because you hear from people all the time, either on Instagram or reaching out about building cabins. What have you observed in the changes over the last 10 or so years?
Well, lately, certainly the last 3 or 4 years, many more people are interested in, or come to me talking about right from the start, that we want to build a rental, um, which is totally fine. But in the past, it skewed more heavily to, this is for us. The rental aspect is a really quite a new thing for people purpose building for short-term rental, where their own use is much secondary, or maybe not even at all. Your situation, Janice, is you're about halfway. You're about on midway on that spectrum. But it used to.
Yeah, because I definitely reached out to you as wanting to be our retirement home, but also I was very clear we need a bathroom because we're planning to rent it.
Right, yeah. And so that's been the trend is more and more people looking to build as an investment, as and less so with a focus on their own use.
And at what point do you think it's no longer, I guess, a cabin, or do you think people are using that term loosely today? Like, oh, you have a cabin in
Yeah,
the mountains and it's this 2,000 square foot mansion. It's like, no,
yeah,
I'm not sure that's a
yeah.
cabin anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
No, okay. Well, if you had to put a size limit on it, I would say that anything over 1,000 square feet, that's less of a cabin now. That's more of a house. And typically when it gets anything over 500 feet is livable. And so people they want bathrooms, like nice bathrooms and closed off sleeping areas and less of the rustic and simplified version of the traditional cabin. However, when you say the word cabin, instantly, I think in North America anyway, everyone gets a picture in their head, and it isn't a high end big thing. A cabin is an iconic structure that's usually small. The reality ends up not very often being that way, especially if they're building as an investment. I recognize that the people's expectations are higher. Like the rental customers, their expectations are much higher, and therefore you have to, if you want to make money and make good money, to pay a big mortgage, because especially now when rates are so high, you have to have a minimum size. So I don't want to be a big downer and say, oh, anything over 1,000 feet isn't a cabin, but someone who's looking to build 2,000 or 3,000 square feet, I don't know.
Do you think beyond like square footage, the number of people maybe you're sharing it with maybe defines what a cabin is? Like in a lot of your designs, it seems like a bedroom or two.
Yeah.
Ours, it's 3, and we have like a max of 6 people.
Yeah.
At some point where you have 10 or 12, does it kind of lose the cabin feel?
Yeah.
Because you have to have a certain amount of square footage per person?
I think so. Like if you say the word in your head, cabin, and then also picture a whole whack of people there, there might be a bit of a disconnect. Oh, for me anyway. I definitely, because of what the traditional recreational structures that we've got here, certainly we've got multi-million-dollar places on the islands. Those aren't cabins, they aren't cottages, they're summer homes. But we also have lots of little dinky, they were built in the 50s or 60s or early 70s and have been sort of kept going and kept small. There's lots of those, and those are, and when I say cabin or cottage here, to locals, that's what they picture. They know that that's what I'm talking about, not the places on the islands that are enormous. Many of them are simply enormous. And those are summer houses, and there's nothing wrong with that, but please don't call it a cabin.
Hey guys, this is Justin from the Chalet. If you're not already listening to this podcast in a cabin or on your way to one, I'd just like to take a second to let you know that our spring calendar is open, along with a few winter nights to get that last-minute ski trip in before the season ends. I'd also like to remind you that our A-frame comfortably sleeps up to 6 guests. We're located just 10 minutes to Mount Snow, 15 minutes to Stratton Mountain, and we're surrounded by tons of trailhead access, including the famous Long Trail. Oh, and the food and drink scene here in Vermont is incredible, since most of it's either raised, crafted, caught, or brewed locally, so you definitely don't want to miss out on this. But to learn more, you can find a link to our page in the show notes below. We hope to see you soon, and enjoy the rest of the show.
I think there's kind of like I was just thinking about this from like the size and the people inhabiting the space perspective, that maybe it's more about kind of like the overlap of use of space that makes it more of a cabin. Like if you have a gigantic place and everyone's separated, everyone has their own rooms, you kind of cross paths maybe in the hallway or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of it, is the blending of spaces, not segregating. You don't have a separate dining room. Everything is much more communal and more relaxed, or at least that's kind of my that's the picture that I try to promote. Is this is a place where everyone can just relax a little bit. It's not city house. You don't need the same rules. Take your shoes off at the door, but you don't, dress comfortably and everyone just relax. That's what it is about. It is just a downshift from the highly organized and regulated daily lives that we all have. It's kind of nice to just have nothing. There's that word again. It's minimalization of excess, and there's a great pleasure in that, for me anyway. Just stripping stuff right back to bare minimums.
Yeah. For me, I feel so torn between about this growth phase of cabins, thanks to Airbnb in the short-term rental market, in the sense that I'm sure you see this too, but some of the comments or messages we get are like, I love this cabin so much, I want to build 5. And it's like, wait a minute, you only need 1. Yeah. And then that's clear that this is about like, well, I can monetize this cabin. Yeah. I want 5, right? Which feels different from I want to build. Yeah. At the same time, not everyone has the privilege of building their own second home right now or at any point. And I do think that the growth of cabins in the rental market allow people the opportunity to experience that nothingness and that ability to get away and be part of cabin culture without having to have the means to build one. Exactly. Just curious what your thought is on this growth, because it is complicated.
Yeah, no, it totally is complicated. And I'll go back to my comment about when we were renting and, saying to Kristen, like I could just totally give this. It feels so good to have people respond. Like our guest book is full of pages of people that clearly were kind of taken by surprise by how awesome the experience was and how it was just not expected. And it's that sharing of that possible experience, that's what I'm after. That's what I like. Yeah, it could be a hotel room in the forest, but the fact that you're in the forest and not, you open the windows and the air is different. The sounds are different. The energy is different than any. Like if you took that same cabin and put it into the city, you wouldn't have the same experience because the energy is different, the sounds, everything's different. And so if you, take it rurally, take it out into the woods, and I mean, for me, lots of lights, lots of views to the outside, because that's kind of the whole point of being there. Versus, you could have a citified, very urban looking house and plunk it down in the trees. And again, the experience won't be quite the same.
I feel like we're seeing a little bit of that too. And that's why I think Justin's question about what makes a cabin is so interesting, because we are seeing this desire to build small, unique spaces in the woods moving very modern, which rubs against my instinct that a cabin is rustic and wooded and small, and that's not all what we're seeing. So it's interesting to watch that growth. And then also like what you were saying about that experience, the hosting experience, that I feel the same way about that. And I constantly wonder, can you replicate that or mass produce that? Does that have to happen on a small scale, or can someone theoretically build 5 Ravenhouse cabins and create that same experience everywhere, which then allows them to share it with more people. Maybe. I'm just not convinced that that's the way to do it with the same level of intentionality or authenticity.
I agree with that. I think you could multiply by 5, for example, spread them out so that nobody sees anybody else. But it would be like, it's a lot of work it's a lot of work. And so if it's run as a business, then you start trying to find economic efficiencies, funnel you into sort of a vanilla experience, because you can't have those little fine details. It's just I think it would be so much harder to do versus a 1 or 2 that you, the owner, if you have a really, I think your term is heart forward, where you're doing it more for the people's experience than the money. Yes, the money will come, absolutely, and it has to be a part of the picture, but I truly believe it can't be the focus and still give people that last bonus 20% of the experience, where they write in your guest book, oh my God, what? Yes. I don't even know what to say, because this was so perfect. And and so many times people, when we were renting, they text me and say, we're booking again, right? Like right now before we leave, we got our next.
Yeah.
It happened over and over again. And it just, as a host, that's like the best. That is the best reward. I mean, the money, secondary, and it'll happen. You give people a beautiful, real, genuine experience, not just a hotel room experience. And they will come back, and they'll tell their friends, and their friends will come back, and you know how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the actual build side of this, because I know a lot of folks have looked at your plans, or thinking about building your plans, or cabins in general might be listening to this. And I know you have a lot of insight to offer on that front. I think most of these questions will probably come from Justin and Sean as architects who know a bit more about this. But to start with, I think you and I both definitely, actually all of us, because you all get these questions too, get questions every day in our DMs or inboxes asking about the build. What are the most common questions that you get from folks? And what's the biggest piece of advice you would give based on those questions?
Number one, cost. Everyone wants to know what it costs. And unfortunately, that's an answer I cannot give. It's impossible.
Why is that such a tricky one to answer? Can you talk to us a little bit about that so people understand?
Because there are so many potential variables, starting with where you are in the world, what construction costs are. If you're going to hire someone, what those labor rates are. If you're going to do it yourself, how much skill you have, and therefore how much time it's going to take. And like that, there is simply, and I really hesitate, from my experience as a builder, from unfortunate experience, I've come to learn to not give numbers, because as soon as a number goes out into the world, that's what people will lock onto it. And if it's not the right number, they've locked onto the wrong number. They get blinded, and anything that's above it or below it it doesn't make sense. And so I really resist talking about money, about costs, until many, many more things have been identified. Like if someone, so many people, that's the first question. How much does it cost? I'm like, how much does a ton of feathers weigh? I don't know. What, it's an impossible answer without knowing a whole bunch of background information. It's obviously an important thing to know from the get-go. Yeah. So I guess my biggest piece of advice is for people to do their own background research for where they are. If you're in upstate New York, you research how much the going rate is for a builder to, like most, with some exceptions, every building of a certain general size and type, they're going to cost about the same per square foot if given a certain level of finishing. There's not, one building is not going to be necessarily twice as much money as the same building that has the same square footage. So, just people educating themselves ahead of time about what their local prices for different things are. How much is, even you could go to the resale price of any real estate and sort of compare it, where you are compared to other places in the same state or same province, just to get a feel for what the general market looks like. Right. And the past 2 years, right now, the pandemic has sort of upended all sorts of costs, materials and labor. Like we hear most builders still have a 12 to 18 months backlog of work, and that's better than it was a year ago.
Really?
Yeah, it's been insane. And the result of that is that labor rates, and also we have like super labor shortage for skilled trades. And so labor rates are cuckoo. They're no, sorry, let me back up. They're high compared to what they were. And maybe what they were was not, I think wages are coming up to maybe where they should have been for a lot of the trades here. Anyway,
but people aren't used to it, so it seems crazy high.
It seems crazy high, yeah, and for sure it's a big deal. But so advice for people is self-educate before starting to ask the question of how much, because you might get an answer. Someone might answer you and say, "Oh, well, the national average is $250 a square foot," and there pretty much is almost nowhere in North America you can do that anymore. But 5 years ago, $250 a foot was, that was a pretty decent custom-ish home. Now, nah, not even close. $400, $500, $600.
Yeah, $400,
$500, $600 a square foot. And I also have a big resistance to using a per square foot price, because like you, Justin and Sean, you guys know, the smaller the house is, the higher the per foot price tends to be. Like I can be able to, the national average is of the States is still, it's old info, but it's still around $250 a square foot. But it's also based on, 25 or 3,000 square foot tract homes, which are, cheap to build. They go up fast. They're done in multiples, and it bears no relation to like a 1-by-1 smaller custom. I'll say custom because it's not, you're not doing multiples of them. So that's my biggest piece of advice on cost is resist the urge to lock in on a number until you've done your own research to really understand what your local number might be.
I don't know if you know this, but one of the main state mottos is the way life should be. I personally think this is the perfect description of Maine, and I am probably guilty of overusing this phrase. Whenever I visit the cabin, the very first thing I do is head straight for the guest book, because there's nothing I love more than hearing what our recent guests have been up to, where they ate, shopped, hiked, and what they enjoyed most about their stay in Freeport. This is one of my favorite recent entries. After 2 years of not being able to find time to get away since our engagement, walking into this inviting and carefully thought out cabin allowed us to finally take a deep breath. Having no cares in the world except keeping the wood stove going and our pup happy is our new definition of relaxed. If this doesn't describe the way life should be, I don't know what does. So if you're looking to get a taste of this, head to our Airbnb calendar and book your stay. And if you can't find any that work, don't forget to sign up for our email list. This is where we send any last-minute cancellations and where we open each seasonal calendar first. We can't wait to host you.
I was going to say, going back to the local number there, I think it's good to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about cabin building, is a lot of these times they're going to be a little bit more remote.
Yeah.
So if you're not building on a cul-de-sac in a development 2 miles away from a Home Depot, it's going to get a little more costly. And that's in addition to all the site work. You got to run underground power for 1,000 feet,
Yeah.
I mean, these things are things that are tough to put a number on. I mean, when you're talking about trucking material, all the way up a mountain versus, down the street, I think that starts to add up quick. So that's
does
also
add up.
something to keep in mind.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And even if you are able to, for some reason you had the perfect spreadsheet that could nail down all these numbers, they change so quickly. Our lumber pricing at probably the worst time to build.
Yeah.
Our lumber pricing went up 100% from what we were originally looking at.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a number at the beginning, but that's going to change throughout.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And you mentioned too, the cost per square foot in a smaller place too. People feel like they could maybe spend a little bit more because there's not so much square foot. So that kind of average square foot pricing doesn't really fit all that much.
No,
all that well.
No, it does not at all. It definitely does not. And I know that that's for the general public. It's an easy thing to talk about because it's so widespread, right? You go to a real estate listing for a resale house, and most people automatically just divide the cost by the square foot to sort of see where this particular house lines up. But when you're building and it's a small place, just that's thrown out the window. Doesn't work at all.
Is there anything that you would say in a lot of these builds that someone should value more in their design than other things?
Absolutely. I always encourage people to build as small as they can in order to conserve resources of your funds and make the things that you interact with daily simple stuff. Your front door handle, your kitchen sink, your shower hardware, your flooring, the things you touch and are going to be up close to. I always encourage people to, and windows, buy the best you can, even if you save money in other places where it's less important. And for me, that's where it's the human interaction, the things you're going to touch, the things you're going to see and look at and appreciate. And Janice, for you, so I know we talked about early at the beginning, you were like, I don't want the wood, I want all of the inside, and you had to make a hard choice and I know that for the exterior siding and the interior finishes, you had to do some juggling of, well, this is how much money I'm comfortable and able to spend versus what I had in my head of what I want it to look like. And I think you've made some really good choices and compromises that didn't dilute the feel of the place. And so when I say cost versus value, when I propose something in a design that somebody like I love paper stone as a countertop material, and I proposed to someone, well, let's do your countertops in paper stone, and they come back and they priced it out, and they say, "What are you talking about? What? That's insane pricing. I'm just going to do laminate." I'm like, oh, okay, hold on. you this like I personally feel those are the things that I really appreciate every single day, and they're worth it to me to to make that extra effort to make those happen. And if I need to exchange out, if that's going to cost me $5,000, I need to save 5,000 somewhere else in order to make that happen. But I feel it's really important to make those important, special, the human, the things you're going to touch and appreciate as a human being. Those are where I see greater value regardless of cost.
And that's where I feel like you do a really good job, what you were saying at the beginning of being an interpreter, facilitator, because I had never built a cabin before. So when it came to like a cost sheet, I'm looking at a spreadsheet and what the total numbers are. And you were always willing to hop on the phone and be like, and you were kind about it. You never told me what I needed to do, but windows, for example, I remember that conversation and I was like, like $12,000 in windows.
Yeah.
And you were like, Janice, I know that feels like a lot. Do not cut on windows. Or you might not have said do not, but you were like, I highly recommend that this is not where you cut back.
Yeah.
Let's think about siding. Let's think about these other things. And every time I'm in the cabin now, I'm reminded how important that decision was. And I'm so glad that I didn't cut there. But I don't know that I would have made that decision on my own without someone who has been there and experienced the finished product multiple times to help me get that sense of perspective.
Yeah. And that's like, for me, that comes, and I'll go back to windows as an example. So it's always been my thing. And so when we were doing the big houses, most people like you would build a spreadsheet and have a number assigned to everything. And, so pre-COVID, generally, even a high-end window, you could get them pretty quick. Certainly within a few months for a high end, and weeks for less high end windows. COVID has like completely blown that up. Right now, we basically have to order windows as soon as we start excavating, because it's going to take that long for them to arrive. Anyway, let me backtrack. So people would have a spreadsheet of costs, and as the project went along, and they started, freaking out about how much money they've already spent and, how to get to the finish line. And invariably, because we didn't have to order windows until later into the build, I kept finding people were like, well, I'm not spending 20 grand on windows when I can spend 10 or 15. And they just, without thinking about the implications of doing that, they were looking more at the cost versus the value. They were in their head prepared to go white vinyl instead of, raw wood for their interior finish. I'm like, So then I started to encourage people to, let's order the windows now, and then get that off the table. You've spent that money, it's gone. Spend the money on the good stuff as early as you can. You need to have a buffer in your building budget, but once the juicy bits have been paid for, then you won't be tempted to downgrade them as you watch your bank account get dried up. It's going to happen. That's the reality. You can't build something and not suffer a little bit of pain. The end result, I really do hope, Janice, I keep come back to you. Your experience made me so happy, because you got some pain points along the way and some reality checks, and you kept persevering, and you've figured out how to do it without sacrificing the important stuff. In my mind, the important stuff.
Yeah, I feel that way. Justin and Sean, how did you all think about this in your build? Because you had 3 of you who had to make those decisions. and a huge wall of windows in the A-frame.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I was just about to comment. I think that proves the value of having an architect or a designer on board for these projects, especially if you have no experience. In our case, me and Sean obviously have experience in architecture and design. So otherwise, I mean, if you're, not to pick on Janice again, but maybe if you're just looking to build a house, you're going to have that spreadsheet you're going to put together, and then you're going to let that kind of drive all your decisions, which could get dangerous. Like you said, you start making sacrifices on these important elements like windows or exterior siding, and then you get these vinyl countertops, and then I think that you just kind of go down the rabbit hole, and then there's all these cheaper materials out there now, so it's like, oh well, why would I spend this much on these windows if I can spend half on these? And you don't really understand the implications of those decisions. So I think it's so important and so huge to get an architect or designer on board day one, and like Janice did. I think that's massive.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree. And in that vein, I'm not an architect, and I'm always willing and happy to admit that people should, if they can afford it, if they can figure out how to afford it, and they should try to figure out how to afford a true architect, because designers are unregulated. It's it's kind of hit and miss to what you're going to end up getting. Obviously, someone that has a track record that you can go and look at their stuff. Whereas true architects, like you guys, have actually gone to school and learned the rules, and that knowledge value is worth every penny. Just for everyone listening, please don't disregard professional advice and what it can gain you. It's again cost versus value. You'll save thousands of dollars, but what are you losing in the exchange for saving that money? You can't even imagine the number of times that I'm sure you guys have, a customer or a client has come to you with an idea of what they want to do, and you can look at it and go, oh no, that's not going to work. I mean, I'm doing it right now with the folks and trying to rejig this old house. They keep coming to me with hand-drawn little graph paper layouts, which are awesome, and I'm glad that they're thinking about it. But then I point out that, hey, you've only got 16 inches between the wall and the toilet, the corner, how are you going to walk past that? You're going to shimmy sideways, and it's things, the small little, not tricks, but knowledge that a pro understands and can help people not paint themselves into a corner. I think that's super important.
That's a good lead in to one of my questions here, which is the human scale of a cabin. And you were just talking about how, a design might lay you out with 16 inches of space that you can't move by comfortably. But I think a lot of the charm of some cabins is the quirky residual spaces that don't necessarily need to be laid out to code or to scale.
Yeah.
Where do you find like the balance of that, where you're, leaving some spaces where maybe the roof slope kind of dies into a floor? In architecture school, they called that dead cat space because that's where cats go.
Yeah.
But it's basically, unusable space or uncomfortable space versus designing everything to fit. And then you almost have a typical spec home at the end of things.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance?
I think the balance is driven by what I always just, again, default to what the customers or what they're aiming for. I personally like unusually low ceilings in places. For the my entry my sort of typical entryway has a low ceiling that then opens to a vault as you come into the main room, and it's that original design was highly intentional for how that's going to make you feel passing through. And it's been surprisingly difficult to convince people that that's going to feel good. And it goes back to what a typical suburban house that's being built now. Most people want 9-10 foot ceilings, and try to talk people back. Let's keep proportions and scale here. If I give you a 10-foot ceiling in a cabin that's only 14 feet wide, you're going to feel like you're in a tunnel.
It's a pretty key idea in architecture, and our schooling was the idea of a threshold, where either the reverse of what you're saying, where you're coming from a larger space down into a smaller space, or the opposite of that, a smaller space that compresses you into a larger space to make you feel something when you enter a space. And I think that, along with, those other little spaces, it's always the balance of form and function, and finding out, I think, spending time in spaces where those kind of quirky areas exist, to figure out what makes you comfortable or makes you uncomfortable, because dealing with some of those things is fine for some people, and some people it may not. So kind of experiencing that space, figuring out what you can deal with and what is aesthetically nice to look at, versus like, I'm not going to turn myself sideways to get down this hallway.
Right. Yeah. So absolutely. So bathrooms and kitchens, I see those as a little bit untouchable. I don't, the whole tiny home wave, which has sort of happened at the same time as the cabin wave, has illustrated to me how I don't want to experience a cabin. I like when I go to the cabin, I like to cook, and so I don't want to be jammed into we're using one burner. I have limits. Even me has limits to how much oversimplification happens. So I want the kitchen to be a good size. I want the bathroom to be a comfortable size. I don't want to jam myself in while sitting on the toilet. But the other spaces, I keep them open so that everything flows, and they're more intimate. If this building is smaller, if you start putting up walls, it just becomes ridiculously just a miniature version of the house in town, versus if it's open and somebody's sitting on the couch, you're only 10 or 15 feet away from somebody in the kitchen instead of in a different room. Definitely, I like to emphasize the intimacy and the scale, and do it differently than would be acceptable, and most people would expect in their house in town.
That kind of goes back to that shared communal space we were talking about.
Yeah. So except for bedrooms and bathrooms, I like it open.
Yeah, I think going back to like Sean said earlier about having that strategic kind of overlap space there is kind of where you can start, making kind of those adjustments in your floor plan. But so it sounds like, once you get through your kind of designing phase, it sounds like you're pretty involved in the building process as well.
Well, I have dual purposes right now. Most of my designing, I don't have any hand in building it, but every once in ones that are close to home here, yes, we do. It's always easier if I'm going to be the one building it, because then I have a vested interest in pointing it in maybe a different direction than if someone else is going to be building. I might push a little harder for a certain element because I'm going to be the one doing it, and I want to get it right.
You don't have to be as clear in your drawings either. You can kind of leave some up to the imagination.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I don't think I've ever built anything. No, I guarantee you, I've never built something and not deviated from the plans. I don't think anybody has. Anyone who with construction experience, I mean, they're are always opportunities that present themselves that you just couldn't foresee on paper. Like so many times you get the walls up and the window openings are roughed in and you can walk around and so many times you're like, I think that window needs to either be bigger or move or changing, just doing little micro tweaks to capture a view a little better, or the customer comes in and says, oh, if I'm sitting on this chair, I think I need that window to be lower so that I can, but none of us foresaw how they would necessarily lay the room out until they can walk that space. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to, while they're building, whether it's me building or whether it's someone else, is pay attention to the details. Don't the plans are your guidebook. Janice, as an example, your kitchen window. Remember, you sent me a picture.
I was just thinking about that.
You sent me a picture and you said, "Is this right?" And I was like, "Oh no, that's not right." And whereas if you hadn't been paying attention, and then the Corey would just kept going, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just following the plans, or I don't actually know how that came about. But whatever, you spotted it, we resolved it, and it made it that much better by continuously assessing as the build goes on, in case maybe I want to move that wall, maybe I want to move that window or adjust something a little bit.
Well, and in fairness, having you so involved in the build, if I didn't have you throughout the build as kind of a source of support and help, I wouldn't have had anyone to call. So I would have just been looking at that window being like, oh, that doesn't feel right, but maybe I don't want to say anything. But because I could call you and you verified, yes, you want that to be at eye level so that you're standing at the sink and you can see out into the woods, it gave me the confidence to then say to the builders, hey, I'm so sorry. Can we move that window down? And I am forever grateful for being able to have made that decision.
Yeah. And in the grand scheme of things, it probably took Corey or this guy's like an hour or two to adjust the window placement.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, like money well perfectly spent. That's the time to do it.
And on that note, it sounds like, I mean, from what I've heard from Janice, Corey, obviously being related and everything else, sounds like he did a really nice job.
Yes.
And he was easy to work with. I mean, do you, especially with cabins and maybe these custom builds that you do you find it more challenging today than ever before to find these contractors that are more focused on the value of craftsmanship versus just having a business model of like kind of quick and fast and cheap and get it done, kind of like a spec home? And they start making, skipping steps and thinking they know the next step. And then you may run into little issues like this where they're not completely reading the plans.
Yeah.
Do you see that becoming an issue even going forward?
Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily a new problem. It's probably a little more acute now that prices are higher and some markets have so much work and only a limited number of people to do it. There obviously the temptation is let's bang it out and get on to the next one and make money there. I've never worked like that. I've never worked for a company like that. My experience has, like right from the beginning of being a carpenter with like a bigger home builder, the focus has always been on like one at a time. We're making the best product that we can, given them all of the parameters that we're have to work with, money, site, everything. People need to do as much research as they can in order to find those builders that do give a shit. I mean, again, I come back to money. If it's only about money, it's something's got to give. Whereas if the builder really has an interest in the end result and takes super pride in the end result, yes, you may pay a little more for that, but you want to pay more for that. You want that the best end result that you can versus like, yeah, I can throw a rock and hit somebody with a pickup truck and a chop saw, and maybe they know how to build, maybe they don't, I don't know. But if you as a customer go out, and if you're only looking, you give 3 or 4 builders a set of plans, and your mindset is, I'm just going to go with the cheapest guy. ah that's like a super red flag. um
So
Maybe.
what should people be asking? How do they, for someone who isn't an
Well,
architect
you
or
got to
doesn't know
go.
much about
I,
this?
I think I think that the best way is to go and look at their past work, and even better is, you know, have a conversation with those customers. What would they like to work with? How was the experience? Did you, were there some common problem? Ask just general, like, you need to. This is going to be an intimate relationship, between the customer and the builder, or whether it's a GC, or whether, like, big or small, it's going to be an intimate relationship. And if it's only based on money, you're going to be banging heads and nobody's going to get along. At some point, there's going to be a lot of grief and crying, because there will be a money hurdle. And if the focus is on what the cost is versus what the value is of spending. If he sits you down and says, okay, this part of your project's going to be expensive. We could save you money by doing this or doing that or not doing anything. Consider the overall value. And being I like to think of myself as a craftsman with building. I could take great pride in the end result being super, like, as good as I can make it. And sometimes I feel guilty about how long it takes because it's costing more, but at the end of the day, don't cut corners. Cut as few corners as possible, because, like, the end result is so important. And it is, especially if it's a personal, like, yeah, if you're just building something as quote unquote an investment to short-term rental it, and just, make as much money as you can. Maybe those compromises don't matter to you if you're never going to have a personal relationship with that building. But if you are going to have a personal relationship with that building, do it to the best of your ability. And to me, that means definitely not only looking at what it costs you. Um, the picture is much bigger than that. The long term is much more important than that.
On that note, I just have two more questions for you.
Okay.
And the first one is, where can people find you? What can they find? Your plans? Do you offer consulting throughout the build for folks who might have purchased your plans and could really use that guidance throughout the way? Just tell us where people can find you.
Generally, the best doorway is through the website, ravenhousedesign.ca. Then you can email me directly from there. You can find me on Instagram. You can DM me. But to be honest, folks, I'm lousy or I'm much slower at replying to those than to emails.
I'm so lucky you replied to me, because I think that's how I reached out to you
Yeah.
first, was via DMs.
And consulting, absolutely. Like, I'm most of the time, I'm just happy to be a coach. I don't need to get paid to do that. I want your project to be successful. I want, that's the whole point of this. The whole point of this is not to make money for me. I'm not going to get rich doing it. I want people to have that awesome experience. I've seen it, that's why I love custom building, when we're interacting with the customer directly, and we're creating this or version of the dream that they've had in their head. There's nothing better than that. So yeah, phone me up if you think that window's in a bad place, and we'll talk about it.
Spoken like a true Canadian. This is what happens when we get rid of capitalism and move towards socialism.
No.
I love it.
I love capitalism. I like making money just like the next person, but it's for what I do, it's down the list.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
This was a treat.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you guys.
Your thoughts.
Hey guys, this is Janice, and in case you haven't figured it out already, we're pretty new at this whole podcasting thing. So it would be a huge help if you wouldn't mind taking a second to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or some kind words on Apple Podcasts. This goes a long way in helping other cabin lovers find this conversation and hopefully become a part of it. Thanks so much, and excited to share more with you.